University's Keller Center, educating leaders for a technology-driven society.
Which is sponsored jointly between the Keller Center, which I'll say a bit more about in a second, Jumpstart New Jersey, which is it's called its formal name, Jumpstart New Jersey Angel Network, and as its name implies, it's a private member-led group that makes angel investments in early-stage technology companies, and they've been longtime partners of Keller Centers. And also another partner is the law firm of Drinkers, Biddle, Reed. So these three groups jointly sponsor this series. I'm going to say a few things about Brian in a second, but let me first say a couple words about the Keller Center. As many of you know, the Keller Center was founded in 2005 here at the Engineering School. It's been generously endowed by Dennis and Connie Keller. Dennis is an alumnus of Princeton, a trustee, a longtime supporter of the School of Engineering, even though he himself was an economics major. The mission of the Keller Center is essentially very simple. It's to educate leaders for a technology-driven society. And this breaks down into a number of specific activities, one of which is sponsoring the development of courses that bridge across from technology into the social side of things, economics, culture, and so forth, but also through the exposure of students to leaders through internships in the summer, entrepreneurial opportunities relevant to tonight's lecture, and also this type of lecture series. So I'm very pleased today to have Brian here. He is also a Princeton alumnus, my class of 1999, computer science department, part of the School of Engineering here. He's also CEO of AppNexus, which we're going to hear about tonight. Brian is a serial entrepreneur. He can look back, even though he's relatively young, he can look back on a long career in entrepreneurship already. Apparently he started already in high school selling computers out of a friend's garage. While at Princeton, he started a web design firm, which ultimately became used by hundreds of companies. After graduating, he became CEO of Metamorphosis, developing ticketing systems for events and venues. So you can see quite a broad variety of things. Subsequently, he was executive at several companies, LogicSpan, Satova, and Poindexter Systems, before he joined Wright Media in 2003. He's best known for his work at Wright Media thus far, I should say. They developed the first online ad exchange when he was CTO at Wright Media. Eventually, this was acquired by Yahoo for $850 million a couple of years ago. His latest venture, AppNexus, is a leader in real-time and exchange technology, and we're going to hear more about that tonight. So, Brian, thank you for being here, and please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you very much. So I won't bore you with too much real-time ad exchange talk tonight. So yes, I think we titled this 3 Failures and a Success. So I want to talk more about the failures than the success tonight. Mainly because I think the failures are more relevant to those of you who are thinking about being entrepreneurs. The successes are always fun to talk about. I will talk about it a little bit, but I want to go back to my very first company, which I started in high school, and actually I started the day before I went to Princeton, I think, 2 days maybe before. A buddy of mine and I, as high school seniors, had started working for a local ISP, and I know that ISPs are a dying business, AOL, but back in the day, the only way to go online was to have a modem. This may all sound like punch card computers to you, but for me, I was very proud of my 2400 baud modem. So we got hired to go to people's homes and install modems on their computers, and it was the worst job because it would never work. You know, someone would unplug their phone line, and you'd have to drive back out to their house and plug in the phone line and say, "I'm sorry, it's now going to work just fine." It never would. And we'd get, I think we got 12% of $25 a month as our rev share on doing this, which, by the way, is not very much money. And so one day, a lawyer, one of our friends' dads, who was a lawyer, said, "Could you guys build me a www site?" And we said, I really think it's www. And we had no idea how to do this. No one did. This is back before Netscape and Internet Explorer. This is in CSA Mosaic, which was a hobby built by Mark and Andreessen. And so we said, sure, we'll try. And my buddy Pat was the high school yearbook editor or something like that, and I was a computer geek, so I figured we could figure it out. So I read Mark's documentation, and we ended up building this website for this local law firm, and we charged them, I think, $500, which was all the money in the world. We were thrilled with that. And so when I got to Princeton, I thought this is a great way. I was supposed to wash dishes at the grad college, and I made, I think, $7 an hour. And so I figured, I'd rather build websites than do dishes. And so we kept building these websites, and we started with local law firms. I'm from Oregon, and we graduated to these national companies, Kidder Water Sports, and these very esoteric companies. But we were $500 a website. And we'd build these complicated things, and they'd take us a month, and I was thrilled. That was Wawa money and Haven money, and I would just be thrilled. I'd get a check for like $50 after the scanners and printers and Photoshop and everything else we bought. And one day I was reading whatever I was reading at the time. There were no blogs or Twitter or anything else. It must have been the Princetonian or something. And I found out that companies in New York and Chicago and San Francisco were selling these exact same websites for $50,000, $100,000. I was so furious with myself. So that was the first failure, charging $500 for something we could have charged $100,000 for. And being at Princeton, we actually went to the U Store and tried to convince them to let us build their website, I think for $500. E-commerce, we could sell things, we'd take credit cards, and they hired the local newspaper, the Princeton Packet, to build the site. And for anyone who went onto the site in 1997, you could see what $20,000 bought you. You couldn't buy anything. You had to go to the store. So we were very pissed off that for our $500, they could have had this amazing website. So that was the problem with being 18 years old and trying to run an internet company. The really sad thing about it was that we'd actually written custom e-commerce technology that was used by hundreds of sites. In fact, it was the most popular e-commerce software in the world for a while. And because we were idiots, we gave it away for free. This is before open source, where we could have at least claimed we were doing something good. We just didn't realize that we could have made money from this. So we missed out on so many different revolutions. We could have bought the domain ice.com. Our company is called Innovative Computer Enterprises. Marketing is not my topic. And we could have bought ice.com, but we thought iceweb.com sounded better. So just to give you a sense of how smart we were. So eventually we rolled the business down, and we sold the domain for like $15,000. And there's a public company now operating. And again, $15,000 to a public company is lunch money. So consistently, you can see the problem. We were on the beginning of a revolution. We had access to everything we could have wanted. At one point, if you went to Netscape's homepage, it listed the biggest innovators in the internet. And it said IBM, and then it said Intel. And right between them, it said Innovative Computer Enterprises. That's how big we were. Now, it's a gray screen. They didn't have color on the internet yet. You could put an animated GIF up there. So, this is a great example of being in the right place at the right time and having absolutely no idea what to do with it. And so my friend Pat went off to start some other internet company with somebody else, and I went back to eating pizza and Wawa. And, I tried to think about what I'd learned from this experience. And so I learned how to program a computer. I could build a website. So I switched from electrical engineering, which I didn't know how to do, to computer science, which I'd already figured out on my own. And so I started getting A's as opposed to not A's. And something else I learned from that was how to sell. And I had been selling computers out of garages before, but selling software or selling anything to real companies is a lot harder than you might think. Walking into a law firm and explaining what the web is, and then telling them they really need a web presence, when these people can barely use, actually they didn't use email, they didn't know what email was an amazing accomplishment for a couple of kids. And in hindsight, I can imagine how incredibly silly we must have looked as two kids walking into, I think we went to like one of the Comcast local offices in Oregon and said, "You guys have to be on the web." And they just laughed. Why would we do anything with you little kids? But most of you are probably around 18, and you don't feel like little kids, and we sure didn't. We were wearing our best clothes, plaid flannel shirt, corduroys, Timberland shoes, and we thought that was corporate dress and that we could go close these deals. So, but we did learn. We learned that we could go make money, at least Wawa money, by doing this. And we also learned how to build something and sell it and deliver it. It's not good enough just to say, hey, I sold something for $500. You've actually got to give them something they like. And so it turned out those lessons, even though we never were rich from that business, it really was important. So I realized one reason the business had died was because the guy who ran the ISP had been reading my email. This guy, it was his server, so he could do whatever he wanted. So he would read my email and see what we were pricing deals at, and he'd charge less. Or he'd go, meet them in person and charge more, whatever he did. But he was stealing customers. I'm so mad, because we're working so hard to make this money. And so I had this idea, why don't we have secure email? And by the way, it's 14 years later, and we still don't have secure email. In fact, we let Google read our email, and they show ads. So we've gone backwards. But at this point in time, it was 96, I guess, we thought, why don't we build an email client that's secure? So every email you send is automatically encrypted, and every email you get is automatically decrypted, and we'll make millions of dollars. And by the way, no one can read my email anymore. And so there was a guy in my dorm in Forbes who was probably either the smartest guy at Princeton or the craziest. He was this guy, we called him Crazy Eddie because he'll probably watch the video. Hi, Ed. He would run around in shorts in the winter and wear flip-flops, and his hair was long and scraggly. And he would do computer science assignments in 3 or 4 languages. So if the teacher said, make a battleship program, he would do it in HyperTalk and have it write JavaScript out to something that interpreted in Lisp and then wrote it out using a C++ custom wrapper to tickle TK. And I'm not kidding. Like, he actually did this, and it's probably hanging in a wall because no one's ever gotten all those things to work together. And so I figured he must be really smart. So I said, hey, Ed, could you build a secure email program? And he said, of course I can. So he said, let's spend the summer doing this, and by the end of the summer, we'll have this great business. And so I thought, okay, that sounds good. But how do I find enough money that the two of us can survive for the summer? So we agreed that we'd go live in his parents' basement. And by the way, anytime you ever hear the words parents' basement, no. That's my first piece of advice. Bad idea. Not that it's a bad basement. It was a nice basement, but so I went on the internet and I started surfing news groups and advertising our services as contract programmers. And out of my dorm room, I found a contract gig for $20,000 to build some guy some software, some guy in Florida. He ran a teleprompter business. And so he's the guy who sells a little weird mirrored thing that lets all the newscasters read while they do the news. And he was buying his software for $4,000 a pop from some company in Georgia. He said, well, if you'll build me equivalent software, I can get all the profit and I'll make more money. So we're like, okay, we can build that. So I'm like, Ed, can you build this? He's like, of course I can build it. Now, what I didn't realize about Ed at this point, and I'm not sure if he's evolved from this, but building a teleprompter was of no interest to Ed. Building a commercial teleprompter especially. He wanted to build a teleprompter that could prompt in color, that could prompt live video, that could prompt upside down, could handle Hebrew, right to left languages. So my summer was spent at his parents' basement, drinking Turkey Hill lemonade and Taco Bell, and trying to convince him just to ship a product. Please. It just has to do black and white. Just, maybe you can move the mouse up for faster and down for slower. That's it. We're done. And so this guy in Florida is yelling at me like, where's my software? And so finally, and he's paying us, I think, $2,000 a month installment payments. And so finally in August, and of course, because I'm an idiot, I figured I'd buy a car because $20,000 is a lot of money, so I'll go buy a car. And so I can get back and forth from his parents' house in northern New Jersey. So I drive my car down to Florida and to a trade show at which we demo the software. And so I hand him the disc. He goes, this is wonderful, thank you so much. And never heard from him again. He'd only paid us $10,000, and why would he ever pay us more? He had the disc with the software that seemed to work pretty well. So I drove back to New Jersey having no idea, and it's mid-August. Let's go build that secure email client. Well, we have 2 weeks left in our summer to build the secure email client, and it's about a week later that I realize he owes us $2,000 in the check. It hasn't come. So we sort of ignore it and start thinking about the secure email program and how we're going to make it work and all this stuff. We get back to campus feeling good about ourselves, and now he's $4,000 late. And then a couple weeks pass and he's $6,000 late. Is this guy going to pay us? So I'm in class and I don't know, I must have gotten a note in my dorm room. I mean, this is all before people used email a lot. So somehow I find out that the Dean of Student Life wants to talk to me. So I head over to the Dean of Student Life's office, and I'm like, what's up? And she's like, well, we got this really weird stack of emails. This guy in Florida is suing the university, claiming that you built some software as Princeton, and you violated our nonprofit status, and he's going to sue the university. So we're thinking of either expelling you or putting you on probation for abuse of the rights, rules, and regulations of Princeton, or something like this. And before I burst out into tears very boldly, I was like, what section? Because my dad's a law professor, I have to ask these questions. And it says, she points at it, and it says, student agrees not to misuse university resources. Okay, I'm not a lawyer, but you're going to kick me out for that? My friends pee on trees. I'm trying to make money here. So it did turn out that a couple of the emails I'd sent, I'd used my princeton.edu address, and that we'd then gotten an off-campus address and all of this. So eventually, long story short, we settled the whole thing. He agrees never to pay us any more money, and he lets go of the lawsuit against the university. And now I'm trying to make car payments on nothing. So I bought a cell phone, which still, I've noticed today, don't work on campus very well. And we decided to go into business to compete with this jerk who took our money. Now, we know nothing about teleprompters. Why we thought we could put up a website and sell teleprompter software out of our dorm room, but I'm sitting in classes in the computer science building sort of waiting for my cell phone to ring. Maybe someone's going to find us on the internet and, pay us $4,000 for some teleprompter software. And so needless to say, to this date, we still haven't sold a copy. I'm still waiting. I'm still hoping that someone will buy it from us. And long story short, we never built our secure email program. And, then Microsoft Outlook launched and all the other things happened. And, 10 years later, there's still not a great program. So I think there probably was a market, and I think we probably could have built it, but we got distracted. We built, another business to try to support this, and we got sued, and I got put on probation. So, my permanent record does say I was on probation at Princeton. It doesn't say why, so you can guess. And it was a really tragic failure in some ways, because I wasted a summer doing the wrong thing. I wasted a summer trying to convince Ed not to put video in the scroller, as opposed to trying to figure out how to get distribution and marketing for this product. But one thing I did learn was I had to do all the accounting and set up for this business. So I was actually using QuickBooks when I was, 20 years old, and I learned a lot. And actually, I took accounting class from, I think it was from Professor Reinhardt, the next month or the next quarter, and I actually knew a lot more about accounting than I thought. I learned that I'd done it all wrong. Double entry means you have to enter both the debits and the credits. Didn't learn that right the first time. But what it did was it gave a lot of what I learned in the class a lot more real-life context. It means a lot more when you do your midterm, you're worried about the IRS. As opposed to when you do your midterm, it's like, I got a B. I guess I can't be a public accountant. And so I think that was one of the biggest things I learned from that experience was, hey, first of all, don't get sued. And second of all, don't lose track of what you're really trying to build, because that's actually the most important thing. Making money and paying for it, why don't we get some investors next time? So my third business, I do remember it. I just wrote down some sort of funny points to mention. It was called Metamorphosis. In the beginning, actually, it was called Make Anna Nicole Smith's Website. A couple of my buddies from Princeton had, I still don't know if this is real or not, but they called me up and said, Brian, Anna Nicole Smith needs a website. Why don't we go build it? You've built websites before. This will be a lot of fun and we'll make a lot of money. And so this business evolved somehow through the course of 3 months of not building Anna Nicole Smith's website into a business where we were going to go out to clubs and venues in Los Angeles and put up websites for them. At this point, in '99, Ticketmaster didn't do anything online. So there was this huge market opportunity to go out to concert venues and say, hey, you can make a lot of money. And this is the middle of the hype of the .com days. Now, practically speaking, only 20% of people were online, and nobody was really confident doing e-commerce. So I'm not sure there was a real business there. But also there's a problem of, at some point Ticketmaster was going to wake up and realize, we can sell tickets online. And we're Ticketmaster. We have 3,000 sales reps sitting in Omaha, and we already have every single ticket, so we can just start a website. But sitting here at Princeton, it seemed like they were slow and a behemoth and too expensive and evil, and that we, a bunch of kids, could go out to LA and beat them. And being cocky and arrogant, we decided that we'd rent office space in their office complex, so that just in case they didn't know we were after them, that we would be literally across the courtyard. And so, hold that thought. But and I was also at this point, while sort of figuring out this business, I was taking Professor Zhao's entrepreneurship class, which I think he's still offering. I think that was the first time he taught it, and I hope he's learned a lot since then. But it was funny because everyone else in the class is sort of like, going to be a consultant or going to go be a banker, and there's the three of us in the class who are like, we're writing a business plan, we're going to go be entrepreneurs, we're going to be rich before all of you guys even get through your training. And back in '99, that wasn't completely crazy. There were people starting things like, mp3.com who were making tons of money doing really nothing. And so at the end of the class, you were supposed to write a business plan and turn it in. And we were so happy because we already had a business plan. We thought, we'll just turn it in. We're going to get rich off this, so we'll get A's. And so we handed it to Zhao, and he says, okay, I'll give you guys some feedback. And so he writes a few questions on there like, I don't get this, and what's that, and what are you thinking about this? And we're like, okay, what's the feedback? He's like, that's my feedback. I'm like, what do you mean? You're at Zhao. You're a god. Like, tell us what we should do. He's like, no, that's not how it works. And we didn't know what that meant. So we sort of ignored it and proceeded to work night and day from our dorm rooms and built this e-commerce system. And we on the day of commencement, I guess, we slept through the whole thing because we'd been up all night trying to launch the site. My mom was so mad because I was supposed to supposedly be hanging out with my family. I'm like, Mom, we got to fly to LA the day after graduation. There were 7 of us, 7 Princeton seniors. Like a quarter of the CS department was coming to LA with me to run this company. We were paying ourselves $18,000 a year, and I don't know about the LA real estate market these days, but back then it bought you a hovel in the verge of Koreatown. If there's only one carjacking a night across the street, it was a good week. And so here we are, huddled up, sleeping on couches at the office. And what's crazy is we had 30 people working for this company. 2 days after graduation, I had a 30-person company in LA. We'd raised $500,000, and I'm not good at math, but $500,000 with 30 people doesn't last very long. But we'd raised money from angels. We'd put my parents had put money in, my relatives. We had some Princeton community people put money in. We had a bunch of people who were really believers in this business. And so we actually went out there and tried. And we were more successful than you'd think for a few kids who'd never done it before. Sidewalk.com, which was sort of the predecessor to City Search, had been in a big feud with Ticketmaster for a while. They'd sued Ticketmaster or vice versa or something. So I went down there and convinced them that we should be their partner for ticketing. And so the day before we launched the site, on like July 14th, this is like 6 weeks after graduation, they were going to send an email blast to 180,000 people in the LA area. So because we were rich and loaded in money, we decided to sponsor the Wiener Roast. Some radio station has a big concert with Blink 182 and big bands came. And so of course we printed all these T-shirts and sponsored this. Now I don't know what we were thinking. We also thought we'd give away a car. I'm not kidding. And we had a launch party in the courtyard between our office and Ticketmaster's with real chefs flipping pasta in the air, and Kiefer Sutherland came, and I spent the night before doing 3D animations of our logo to put on big flat screen TVs, or actually probably not flat screen TVs since it was '99, and we did it all out, and it was awesome. We launched the site, and the next day we looked at the stats, and we had I think 100 people who were in the drawing for the car. That's a pretty darn good ROI on your car. So we're just desperate. We bought radio ads. So all around LA it's saying, visit la2night.com. That's LA, the number 2, NITE.com. So, we had no idea what we were doing. So we also forgot that you have to actually make money to run a business like this. We had no advertising on the site because we're an e-commerce site. But we had a minor problem, which was that we hadn't actually secured any tickets from any venues at the time we launched the site. And I realize that my employees here are like, why do we work for this idiot? We'd hired this woman who was like a guru in the LA scene, but what happened was every time a club would decide they wanted to give us tickets, Ticketmaster would call them up and say, if you give them tickets, that's fine, but we won't sell your tickets through our phones anymore. So what are they going to do? Let some random startup sell their tickets online with 20% of the whole world on the internet, if that, or keep making money to pay their bills? And so the answer was pretty easy for them. So yeah, we sponsored the Winnie Rose, we bought radio advertising, we gave away a car, we had a launch party, and we had no tickets. So needless to say, our revenue was zero. We had 30 employees. I was the youngest employee, in fact, as the CEO. I had a corner office on this nice big office building looking out on Wilshire Boulevard. You've been very impressed by my office. And so one day, my best friend and our CFO, Hagos, said to me, Brian, there's a problem. We don't have any money. And I said, okay, that's a problem. We would need money to run this business some more. So I flew to Bermuda, where our biggest investor lived, and I was like, can we have some more money? Because that's how it works, right? And by the way, we valued the business, I think, at $10 million, just to give you a sense of what we thought our business was worth. So I owned a third of a $10 million company. So the day I graduated, I was worth $3 million. It's pretty good. So we're like, can we have some more money? She's like, sure. I was like, oh, this is great. So she gives us a couple $100,000, and I flew back to LA. And on the plane, I had this epiphany. I was like, this business really isn't going to work. And probably I should have had that epiphany before we started it. But I had this great epiphany. It's like, we really shouldn't be doing this no revenue business. We should figure out something that will actually make money. Or we should sell the company to someone who can. And so I actually flew to New York and convinced the company there they should buy our business for, I think, $3 or $4 million. Now that's pretty good. 3 months out of college, we get $1 million each. Our investors walk away with all their money. I don't know. Call me crazy. But my two partners, my two other Princeton friends were like, well, but I don't know about that. Like, everyone else is making $100 million. Aren't we selling ourselves short to only sell for $3 or $4 million? So, and they had a point. I mean, I respect where they were coming from. So we had this big fight. I'm like, $1 million, and they're like, $100 million. And so finally I was like, listen, if you don't take this deal, you're so dumb, you better buy me out. And so they fired me. They said, well, there's two of us, there's one of you. If you don't believe in this business enough to stick with it, you should just leave. This might be my remembering of it, but something to that effect. And I was like, fine. So the problem with this is, now it's 3 months after college, I don't have a job. I don't have an apartment. I don't have any money. So I called my dad and said, Dad, I know yesterday you were invested in my company and I was the CEO and I was worth $3 million. Today I'm your son, I'm broke. Can I come stay with you? So I'll put this as number 3 in the failures list. Failure to convince partners to take money, but more importantly, failure to run a real business, to have any kind of plan B, to have any kind of exit strategy. At least we had capital this time. But, it was a pretty scary moment in my life to be living with my dad. And I love my dad, but, it was not exactly what I thought was going to happen when I started this great.com. But out of the process, I actually learned something extremely important. And I think this is the one thing that I'm most grateful for that experience for, which is I was such a tyrant running this business because I was so scared and desperate that my two partners dragged me to a psychologist's office. And they said, Brian, we actually had a group therapy session where they told me I had the lowest EQ of any human being, and that if I didn't fix it, all the employees were going to revolt. Because, of course, I was not sleeping and running around screaming about how if we didn't have the product out, we would have no business. And I actually took it to heart. I didn't tell them I took it to heart. I told them they were jerks. But it turned out to be really good advice that, in fact, I had no idea how to run a 30-person company. There's not a class at Princeton called running a 30-person company. It might be one in business school for that. But even so, until you've tried to manage 3 people, why should you try managing 30? And especially when they're all older than you, some of them twice your age, almost 3 times your age. And so I realized that sitting in my dad's house, what should I do next, is I should go figure out how to manage a company. That would be a good thing. And that learning management skills and maybe some people skills wouldn't hurt. And so I actually called one of the advisors to my startup and said, hey, could you help me? And so I went and worked for his company for the next 18 months. And he had just left Anderson Consulting, and so he'd spent the last 10 years of his life learning how to work with clients and how to manage people and manage teams and do project management, all of these things. And it turned out in those 18 months, I again had a chance to take all the lessons I learned the hard way and learn them the easy way, which is have someone tell you, how do you recruit, how do you interview, how do you manage, how do you deal with a client that hates you, how do you deal with an employee that hates you. Then we got to, how do you deal with a boss who hates you, and they fired me. But every one of my stories, by the way, ends, I got fired. So let's just start there. But those are the 3 failures, I think, in some ways that really define my success later, if you call it that, which was I had the ability at a very young age to learn my own weaknesses and shortcomings and make some really hard mistakes and lessons. But I was living in a dorm room for most of them, so it wasn't like I was out in the street. I got food, I would say dorm food, but really I was at the Haven or Wawa every night. And I had a chance to do this with very little capital. So one thing I will say is when this business in LA failed, the investor in Bermuda bought back all my family's shares for 80% of what they'd put in. And my family was pissed. I mean, if you put in $25K and someone 3 months later writes you a check for $20K, that's not the best investment. But my uncle called me a few years later and said, Brian, actually, given all the investments I made in the .com era, that wasn't so bad. So I feel good about that. When I went to raise money for Appnexus, I told that story. I'm like, I've always returned something. So those are the defining failures. And now let me talk about success. So there's really two things, I think. There's two kinds of entrepreneurs, I think, that really are successful, and I'm probably wrong. But my thesis is either you have to be really good at execution. That is, you have to have some talents that you can actually use to produce value for a business. Or you have to have so much knowledge about an industry or so much credibility in an industry that you can identify opportunities or execute those opportunities better than anybody else. And so Right Media, which was the company that we sold to Yahoo, was an example of the former. It turns out that after 10 years of running companies and building technology, I had a unique ability to actually build things that other people didn't. And so while I was the CTO and not the CEO, I walked in with at Princeton I studied distributed systems. My thesis at Princeton was about how to scale things across lots of processors. And it turned out that there was this weird moment in the world where advertising was getting very, very complicated, that MySpace was exploding. MySpace was doing, I want to say, 10 billion ads a day. So 300 billion ads every single month on MySpace alone. And if you think about that, that's like 300,000 requests a second, 300,000 ads a second or something like that you have to serve to keep up with the volume. And Facebook's there now. That's an amazingly difficult computer science problem if you think about it. Either you need hundreds of thousands of computers if you're Google, or if you're a cheap little startup, you've got to be tricky. And so effectively, I was all of a sudden a very unique commodity in an industry that, after I left that consulting company and went on, I'd done some personalization things, and I had some knowledge, but fundamentally, I all of a sudden had a unique skill set that was very valuable to a certain industry. And I wasn't really a founder of Right Media. I was hired as a CTO because I said that I could walk in and solve this hard problem better than anybody else. And I had no reason, they had no reason to believe me. I was just some kid. But over the next couple of years at Right Media, we built the system that could predictively choose which ads to show on sites like MySpace better than anybody else. The reason we were successful is because when MySpace would scale its volume, because everyone was going to MySpace, everyone else would fall over and die. Their systems couldn't handle the scale, and ours could. So we'd keep paying them money. And we're talking about, on the average time you view a page on MySpace, we'd pay them like, I don't know, 2/100th of a penny or something like this. And we're talking about incredibly small amounts, but that was more than the 1/100th of a penny our competitors would pay. And so if you add it up to billions and billions and billions of ads, we made them a lot of money. And that was the foundation for Right Media's business. And as we scaled it out to other sites and other networks and other properties, it got more and more interesting because we had this big network. At one point, I think we ran 150 or 200 billion ads in a month. And that was the point at which Yahoo bought the company. But if you deconstruct why I was successful and why the company was successful, you can point back to those failures. You can point back to learning how to sell things. I walked into Yahoo's office. I'll tell you how we sold Yahoo. And I hope someday, Andy Atherton watches this video and laughs because I flew out to Yahoo to meet them and convince them they should work with us. And this guy, Andy Atherton, who's a wonderful guy, probably my hero, given the outcome of the Yahoo situation with Right Media, he wouldn't meet me. He'd accidentally double scheduled. So I flew out from New York for nothing. And so I sat in his office for 3 hours waiting for him, and he finally comes in and says, look, I'm just not interested in your company, and I'm out of time, I can't meet you. And I said, well, this is one of my law firm techniques, well, I'll come back tomorrow. Seems reasonable. And he said, well, I'm working from home tomorrow. So I said, well, where do you live? And he said, San Francisco. And I said, okay, well, what's your address? So I literally went to his home, and I sat at his dining room table, and I convinced him that he should try using Right Media's technology platform. And, it was one of those things where if you're not willing to go to the guy's house, you're just not going to get the deal. But that isn't something you learn in business school, I don't think, not that I've been. I don't think it's something you learn in most jobs. You learn it when you're 17 and going to a lawyer's house is like, well, whatever it takes to close a deal. And now, with Yahoo having bought Right Media, Andy's now running his own company, and it's funny because that entrepreneurial spirit and that sort of drive and the grit to know how to go close a deal like that is really what was successful at Right Media. It's those moments where you could just walk out and take the rejection of somebody saying, I'm sorry, I double scheduled you for 3 hours, and just go home. But I think that's where I learned a lot of these lessons. And so when Right Media sold to Yahoo, I left and I tried to retire. I made it 6 weeks, more or less to the day of being retired. I went to Cuba, I went to Morocco, I went to Spain, I took yoga classes, I took a lot of yoga classes, and eventually realized that the only thing I know how to do professionally is start companies. And what else would I do? Even when I'm on the beach in Cuba, I'm thinking about companies to start. And I convinced my friend and colleague Mike Nolan, who's class of 04, to come start a company with me. And he left Yahoo and left a lot of money on the table to come start this company. And we basically, said we're going to build Right Media again in some ways. We're going to take a lot of the ideas and a lot of the concepts, but we're going to apply them to the new evolving ecosystem, which now Google and Microsoft and AOL and other big companies are starting to pick up on and do some of the same things Right Media did. And we're going to be a player in the ecosystem we created. And I think that was the success. It wasn't the sale of Right Media to Yahoo. A lot of people say, well, Brian, you own 7% of this company. Like, you're rich. You must be happy. And the truth is, I'm happiest now because I'm going back and proving yet again to myself that I can do it, that it's about me this time. I'm the CEO, so if we screw up, it's 100% my fault. I can't point the finger at anybody else. But it's all those same skills and all those lessons and all the failures. My first board meeting at AppNexus, I had convinced Mark Andreessen, who was the guy who taught me how to build websites 13 years ago. I convinced him to invest in this company. And, we have amazing investors and people we work with, Ron Conway and Ben Horowitz and Josh Koppelman, and the list of people we work with now is amazing. All of these people believe in me, not because they know me, but because of the success I've had. And in some ways, that's the scariest thing, because, can I do it again? Was I really any good, or did we get lucky? Was Andy Atherton's dining room table some magic nexus where, good things happen, and really anybody could have been there? And so my first board meeting, I walk up to these people, and I'm the CEO. And I've got to present to these amazing investors what we're going to do. And my lawyer called me after and said, Brian, that was the worst board meeting I've ever been a part of. Ever. That's a lot of board meetings. That's the point. Even though, in concept, after selling Right Media, we should have been the most successful people in the world, with all this money and all this success, and everyone talking about how smart we were, it was actually that process of failing again that I think really brought me back to what it means to be an entrepreneur to me. And it brings me back to, having the guy not pay us the contracts, the money he owed us, or having, the guy read my email and steal business. All these things are just things you learn and overcome. And so now, even though I think AppNexus has done really well, and we've got amazing clients and a great team, mainly Princeton people, right? Like a third at least, Princeton people, I still find myself feeling very much like I did when I was, sitting in my dorm room building websites, which is learning something every single day, screwing up more than you can imagine. Sometimes I feel like a bowling ball bouncing back and forth down the lane. Thank God there's those gutter bouncer things, or else it would be really ugly. But there haven't always been. I've been unemployed. I've been broke. I've been $60,000 in debt because I put everything I had into a business. I felt like I was the smartest person in the room. Usually I don't. I felt so stupid. Of course, the last 15 years. So the reason I was excited to come tonight was because I worry sometimes that, when I was in your shoes, there was a guy who came to present, same sort of thing. He just sold his company for $400 million to Microsoft. And he talked about how great it was. He talked about how great this process had been and how smart he was, and we all wanted to be him. The next week an astronaut came. And we're like, I want to be an astronaut. Like, it kind of felt like, this is the dream life. It's the dot-com age, and everybody's making money, and everyone's an astronaut or a successful entrepreneur or something. And it is possible, obviously, but I wanted to convey, and I want to open up the questions as well, because I think it's really important to note this is a really painful, difficult process. Incredibly rewarding at the end, if you like failing a lot, but it's one that I think is a lot more difficult and has a lot more ups and downs and a lot more challenges than people recognize. And I'll answer one question that hasn't been asked, but that a lot of people ask me, which is, what's the best way to be an entrepreneur? Like, how do I go start a company after I leave Princeton? And I think my new answer to that question is the best way to start a company is not to. It's to be part of a founding team with other people who can give you the mentorship. Once you know what it is that you're lacking. So I'm all for people finding out and failing. And some people are lucky. Mark Zuckerberg never failed, I guess. I mean, Facebook is his first company. It's amazing. But I feel like once you know what you need to learn, there's so many great entrepreneurs and great companies out there that you can learn from. And the best experience of my career was working for people who were willing to mentor me and help me become a better entrepreneur. It was great for me to be the CTO of Right Media before being the CEO of AppNexus, because I got to be in the passenger seat and learn from somebody else making mistakes. And it's really nice when you're getting paid a salary by somebody else who makes the mistakes. And it's nice when you get someone else to raise the money and make those mistakes. So there's a lot of really good things to be said for being in a dorm room when you start your company, because when you screw it up, you still have a place to sleep, and you're not worried about making rent. And it's nice when, so this is one of my new things I'm telling entrepreneurs is, if you can find a low-cost way to be part of someone else's team and still have all the challenges and failures that you would have gotten at your own startup, that's better, because you're bouncing off less gutters, if you will. And that's more or less what I wanted to talk about. So let me open up to questions.
Since you were part of the dot-com bubble in the late 90s, I'll ask, what do you think about the current Web 2.0 situation? Is this a bubble 2.0? I see a lot of companies that don't seem to have a business plan. They think, well, we'll just put Google Ads and that'll pay for everything.
Well, if they have Google Ads, it's a start. I haven't seen those on Twitter yet. I don't know. I think that from my perspective, there are a lot of dollars from venture capitalists going into companies that won't work. I mean, I like the idea of venture capital as a model for disruptive technology. I think, there's a lot of really disruptive things happening, and Twitter's one of them. I don't know if Twitter's the model 10 years from now. I don't know if MySpace is the model 10 years from now. The whole Web 2.0 thing, the idea of the social web, though, I think is a very good, useful concept. I just had a baby 5 weeks ago, and I really am too lazy to remember all of my friends' email addresses. So I like posting them on Facebook and just saying, go see them there. So that's an innovation that helped me a lot. What I don't quite understand is, how some of these business models will actually monetize. As a guy who focuses on online advertising every single day, I can tell you that there are certain kinds of content that are very valuable and certain kinds that aren't. And from my perspective, content is a great vehicle for us to do advertising and make money. I'm completely selfish about this. I recognize I only make my 1/10 of a 100th of a percent if it's good content. But I think as long as the VCs will keep funding these businesses, a few will break out and be truly disruptive, and that's probably a better thing than if we were in the opposite situation where everyone was skeptical and you couldn't raise money and we didn't see these disruptive things. So I prefer to be more of a bull on the idea that some of this stuff will work out than a bear and say most of it won't. I think the things that do pop through are worth all of the failures and things that just don't make any money.
So you started these companies with friends. Would you do that again? Like, it sounds like you hurt some of your friendships doing that.
That's a really good question. So my college roommate Hagos, who I started this company in LA with, we didn't talk for 5 years after our breakup in LA. He stayed in LA. I think he had a really good time. He learned a lot. They merged the company. They kept running it for I think 4 more years, which is really impressive. It's a huge accomplishment. And then he went to MIT Business School, and at one point I finally reached out and was like, listen, we were best friends all through college, like we should be friends again. It was a little awkward to reach out, it's kind of a lot to push under the rug. But it was funny, after, a couple of meetings, we kind of realized that we were both pretty happy with where we were, and that if it hadn't been for that experience and what we learned, who knows what would have happened. So I'm happy to report that, we're still best friends. And, he's running a company. He's the CTO of a very cool company in the ticketing space, again. One of these days he'll stop doing ticketing. And so I think to answer your question, it was really difficult doing business with a close friend, but it's also very difficult doing business with people who aren't friends because there's a certain amount of trust required in a startup. So if I look at Pat McCarthy, the guy who I started that first company with doing websites in Oregon, he has been at almost every one of my companies. And in fact, he worked at Right Media, started a satellite Oregon office, and when we got acquired by Yahoo, he now works as the Yahoo Eugene office. So I can say I brought Yahoo to Eugene, Oregon, which is a pretty interesting accomplishment. But, we've always been friends. I've known him since middle school. We played basketball together. He was always better than me. I've never forgiven him for it. And I think that's where the friendships are really valuable because you get a lot of context. We can point back to, he and I built so many websites together. We've seen so many things. We have such a shared perspective. So I think it's hard. Like, you want to work with people who you have a professional friendship with. I'm not sure you want to, take your best friend in the entire world and start a business together because there's so many risks if it doesn't work out. But if you can build professional friendships and work with people, there's no better co-founder than someone you have at least a pretty high level of trust and friendship with. Because there's always moments as a founder where you have tension. As you build a bigger and bigger company, there's more tension. And there's more times where you have to make choices about what do you do. Do you stick with your founder friend, or do you, do what's right for the company, or do you write for yourself? And it's a new person who comes in who threatens that. And so there's all these relationship things. So relationships are critical, but I wouldn't start a company with a friend. I definitely wouldn't start a company or work in a company with someone I had a relationship with, like an intimate relationship with. I think that's very difficult. And those are all risks, I think, of companies falling apart. It has to be a bond deeper than friendship, is another way of looking at it. It has to be a shared professional trust and mutual respect and friendship, or you're never going to make it work.
I was just wondering what you thought the optimal size for going and joining a startup would be, and maybe what stage of the company, as far as funding that they've received, you think you'd be able to get the most experience from.
So going back to my series on the two kinds of entrepreneurs, if you want to join a company to learn an industry, so let's say you knew that you wanted to be in digital music, right? Then you want to be working with really smart people. It's more about who you work with and the kind of exposure you're going to get. Being the assistant to the executive assistant to the head of Warner Brothers isn't going to get you a lot of knowledge about that business. So I'd say, on the execution side, if you want to be the best in the world at building scalable ad servers, well, that's me, so you can't be. But if you wanted to be, you want to go work in a job where you get exposure to the hardest problem. So I think that's the right size of the team where maybe you're not the CTO the first time around, but you're part of a team of 3 or 4 people building that product. The company might be 15 or 20, or it might be 5, but the point is, how much influence do you have? Or put it differently, how important are your mistakes? That's how I judge it. It's not the size of the company, it's if you screw up, how much does it cost the company? If it's too much, then since you don't know anything yet, probably, it's not a good fit, because now the whole company will fail. And by the way, if they'll hire you, have second thoughts about the company. I mean, no offense, but if a company will hire you to do a job that important, that's scary. But you don't want to be in a company so big that, you can't make interesting mistakes. And I'll give an example of AppNexus. We're at a business that's 25 people right now. And, Cam, I'll point at you. Cam, 6 months ago you joined us? 8? And so he got to be part of one of our most important projects. We rebuilt a lot of our ad technology from scratch. And so he wasn't the point guy, because I still get to write code, which is cool. So I drove the project, but over time he's taken on more and more of it. So he's seen the entire evolution. He's learning from someone who I hope he respects a little bit and can teach him a lot. And so he's gotten this amazing exposure to some hard problems. And in fact, yesterday we were trying to solve a problem, and he took point in a way that I don't think anyone else who's been in this industry for 8 months could have. And so that's the kind of right dynamic. You want to find a company of about that size and sort of the momentum where you can get a lot out of it.
So I might be wrong, but I get the sense that most of your companies are based out of New York. My question is how would you compare the startup scene and the VC scene in New York with the Valley? Because most of the time you get the feeling that if you're a high-tech startup and you don't move to the Silicon Valley, maybe you're not that good of a company anyway. So how would you compare the two areas?
It's rare when people consider being in New York being a big fish in a small pond. It's probably the only time people say that about New York. But I'd say that it depends on the industry. So for my particular industry, if you think about Madison Avenue and advertising, that's all centered in New York. And most of the biggest companies in the online advertising space are actually New York based. So DoubleClick, for instance, or 24/7, obviously WPP, all these big companies are based in New York. Google has a big office there for exactly that reason. So we've actually seen, in Google's case, a Silicon Valley company coming to New York to take advantage of the talent and the resources in New York. So it's kind of an industry-specific thing. If you're building financial services software, you're going to want to be in New York. And this goes towards that core idea of go where your customer goes. But I think for a lot of the companies who are in Silicon Valley, there's an amazing pool of engineering talent, especially if you look at Silicon, semiconductor folks, if you look at enterprise software. Trying to find a great VP of marketing for an enterprise software company in New York is very difficult because many of those people are in Silicon Valley, right? So I think that's where, in most cases, you're probably right that the talent pool and the VC concentration there is better. But for a lot of the new media stuff, if you think about dollars coming from online advertising, you start getting to a situation where you go, well, let's see, the agencies are in New York, they're also in the Valley, but they're mainly in New York, and then, Europe is close to New York, and all the advertising guys, you start seeing a critical mass of things happening. So for us, it's actually an advantage. I can hire from DoubleClick, from 24/7, from Yahoo, from ContextWeb, from Google. I have all this talent in New York that I can pull from in my sector with specific experience. There are so many salespeople in New York. So I think that's where actually what we're doing, we'd rather be in New York than anywhere else in the world. But you're probably right that that's not every single company.
So, in your experience, you've had invested your own money, you've had friends and family, you've had angel investors and venture capital. Is there a certain type of startup that's suited to each, or what are sort of the differences between these different funding sources?
Yeah, there's a lot of really good resources about that online, but my personal take is that, and most entrepreneurs will tell you this, that having other people's money is a huge responsibility. And to the point I made before, taking other people's money comes with a certain set of consequences. I would love to say that when I invest money in startups, I know what I'm doing. I was actually telling these guys as we walked over that I just lost a lot of money on a startup the other day, and I felt really stupid, and that I suck at investing, and I should never do it again, which is probably true. But there's a real risk in that process of, what are the stakes? When I lost my family's money in my first startup, that hurt me personally. Like, I felt guilty that I'd taken their money and lost it. And I felt somewhat better when I got them back most of it. If it's your own money, well, that's great if you have any. I've never had any until very recently. So that's not been an option. But certainly you could. But I think what you learn is after a few startups, you go, well, there's a certain amount of capital that makes this worth doing. And I've got to choose. There's a couple of good things. If you look at Rich versus King, there's a couple of good pieces on the internet about this. But what's your goal? If you want to own the company and be in control and be the king, then raise as little money as possible, and get as much traction as you can. But a lot of times, to be a really successful business, AppNexus has raised more than $15 million in the last 2 years. But we're trying to win. We're trying to go compete with and work with big, huge companies where if we didn't have capital, we'd be screwed. So I think if you have to raise money, you raise it. But you'll see a lot of articles out there that say, go as long as you can, get the nicest money possible. So angels are very nice money. Because, when I lose money in a startup, I don't go yell at people and say I'm not going to give you a Christmas present anymore, like my family does. So I'd say if you can afford to not have to raise family money, you're probably better off. But then again, you could say that my family effectively gave me a business school education of a sort. I learned more in the 3 months that I ran that company, or maybe 6 if you include my time here, and I only lost a little bit of money. So it probably was my business school fund that they invested, if you will. But that was a very good way, because no investor would ever have invested in me. So they're the only people I had. So that's probably the best way to think about it is, at one point you say, well, I don't want to lose my family's money, but if it's the only money I can get, then I better learn a lot and do a lot with this money, so at some point I can buy them, football tickets or something. My dad wants a football team. I don't think he's going to get it.
Maybe one more question.
Could you talk any more about the time between startups? In stories about startups, people often say, well, I was here and then I was here, etc. You had a long chain. So how did you decide where to go next, and what did your life look like from one to the next?
That's a good question. Well, I talked about living in my dad's house for a while. And where I went next was sort of the only place I could think of. I mean, I didn't have many options. When I left the company that it was doing the consulting, where I learned a lot, the transition was actually interesting. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any money. I was unemployed. Sort of my life has been, try really hard, fail, be unemployed, have no money, do something crazy, hope. So I got an offer, ironically, from Lehman Brothers to go work in CDOs. So and it would pay, six-figure salary, real job, and I'd actually have money. It was really hard because I was like, that sounds really good, and the CDO thing sounds like we're just printing money. Like, that's just too good to be true. And so, ironically, that was probably more risky than what I actually did do, which was I went and started a new company. And it's funny when entrepreneurship becomes less risky than finance. But that was a really tough period. I was really at loose ends with myself, and it was agonizing. I was on unemployment. I mean, I didn't know. And then the next time I tried to decide was similar. When I left that company and was trying to decide what to do, I actually interviewed at Right Media. The founders had just left DoubleClick, and I interviewed, and I went in a suit, right? Because I figured I got to give it all because I have no money and I got to get a job. And one of the founders, who's a Princeton guy, who I didn't know while I was here, but he gave me this interview and he was like, yeah, you're kind of overqualified. We're not going to give you the job. And I was heartbroken. I was like, this is a cool company. I like the space. So I actually went and worked as a consultant for another company in the industry for a few months and got to know, they were sharing office space with Right Media. It took me 3 months to convince the Right Media people to actually hire me as their CTO. And truthfully, they didn't hire me as a CTO, they hired me as a developer. And I eventually convinced them to make me their CTO. So this is, I sort of glaze over, like, yeah, I was a CTO. But I actually had to apply for the job twice to get it. And, in the process of that, I had no idea. One guy, a guy from a bank asked me, Brian, how did you choose Right Media? It's like, I didn't choose Right Media. I had no options. It was a cool company that some guy from Princeton put on TigerNet. I literally got the job through TigerNet, and I didn't even get the job. So I wish I could say I had something to do with that, but that's the hardest process. There's no obvious career path for an entrepreneur, because all you are in some ways is a bowling ball careening down the lane, hoping you don't go in the gutter. And I don't have a career path. When we sell AppNexus for $2 or $3 billion, or go IPO or fail miserably, I don't have a plan. If I have any money left, I guess I'll do it again. If I don't, I'll get a job. But I don't know. I don't have a good answer for how I chose what I chose. I just knew always that I wanted to do more and prove that I could do more and take on the next challenge, and just kept on going. And good things happened. That's why I wanted to talk about the failures, by the way, because you can't plan for success, at least in this space, as far as I know. You just have to keep getting better and better and better at execution and execution and execution, and someday it all pays off, or it doesn't.
With that wisdom, why don't we thank Brian again?
Princeton University's Keller Center, educating leaders for a technology-driven society.